Hello everybody, today I'm going to be showing you how to make one of these traps right here. This trap is a traditional Makatao mouse or rat trap called the daba. Now I learned about this trap from somebody named Barnabey Yeh. He comes from Kalapo village, one of the Makatao villages over in Taiwan. And he saw my content on YouTube and stuff and asked if I could make a trap from his tribe. So here we are with a tutorial. Alright, so with everything here, I should have everything I need to make this trap. So I've got just a couple of sections of larger pieces of bamboo left over from the last video. I've got just one long piece of smaller bamboo, and then I've got some string. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is cut off a section of the bamboo to use for the main post. And so I'm going to have it around the length of my hand plus my forearm combined. So I'm going to take it also into consideration where the nodes are. I'm going to cut just above one of the nodes, and we could just leave this part down here. And so I'm going to carefully cut around this just to make sure it doesn't split. Okay, so now we have this piece cut off. Now the first thing we're going to want to do here is cut a groove into the top here, and that's going to be the groove that will be fitting our limb string. And there we go, we've got our groove carved in. Next thing we want to do is carve a spike into this so that later we can put it into the ground. Now this piece is shaped a bit like an oval, so what we're going to be doing to cut in the spike is cut in from the longer sides. And there we go, there's our spiked end. Now we're ready to split this piece of bamboo. So we're going to split the piece of bamboo from the spiked end. You're going to want to get it right down the center. So find the center of that, make sure you're right on it, and just tap your knife right on down through it. Now, anytime you're doing this, you want to make sure your knife is still going straight. So anytime you go through a node, just kind of check your alignment to see if you're still making a straight line. So you want this split right down the middle. And there we go, we've got the two halves of it. Now from here we're going to sharpen up the spike a little bit more so it's easier to stick in the ground. We're just going to take it from the inside and cut that down. So that spike up there is a nice proper spike. And we're going to be doing this on both pieces. And there we go. The ends of both pieces are little spikes now. And so you can see how those are going to fit together. Just like that in two halves. Okay, so next thing we want to do is cut out 3 pieces of bamboo of approximately the same size. Now this piece right here is probably only good enough to make 2 of 3 of them, because we want the rectangles to be at least thick enough that they don't bend easily. So there's one of them, and then we're just going to split the side right here to make the second one. Right, and there's number 2. And finally, and then there's number 3. Okay, so for now we are going to be keeping them all at the same length, but later we will have to cut them down to different lengths. Okay, so now we're going to use our longest piece of bamboo to make the limb for the trap. So generally in terms of width, you want like around 1.5 fingers worth. So I'm going to split this one right down the middle about. Alright, so from here we've got it all split down. We're going to want to shave down the edges a bit so we don't cut ourselves on them. And we're going to break out whatever nodes we have in the middle. Now I want this limb to be a bit shorter. I want it to be just around an arm's length long. So we're going to be cutting it right down here. Now we've got that part popped off. We want this side to be flat. And we can add a little bit of a taper on this end. Alright, there we go. And now what we need to do is carve in our notch. Alright, now to carve in our notch, since we have a node right here on this side, we're going to choose this side to carve it into. And so we're going to go just above that node to start off. I'm going to score this right here. And we're going to start off by just cutting out from that. Once you feel you've cut out enough of that, feel free to cut into that and make sure you be careful so you don't cut yourself here. There we go. You can see we made ourselves a little shelf right there. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. And there we go. We made our notch. Okay, so now that we've got all 6 pieces of the trap blanked out, we're going to need to make some dowels to hold them all together. So here I'm just going to be taking one of these pieces of bamboo I cut off earlier and just going to be whittling it down until it's a circle. Now these dowels don't have to be perfect cylinders, especially as the inside of the bamboo will deform a little bit as you put them in through the holes. Now the first one we need has to be at least a little bit longer, so I'm going to say just over a middle finger length worth. So I'm going to cut it off just around there. And there's our first dowel. We're going to sharpen up the end just a little bit so that this way it's easier to fit through the holes we carve. And we don't want this so sharp as it'll stab you. We just want it so that we just got a little bit to work with when putting it in. Okay, now we need 2 more dowels, and these ones can both be a bit shorter. You can just cut them off just around there. So it's just maybe about half a finger. We're going to do the same thing and just sort of sharpen up the ends a little bit on both of these. And there we go. There's the 3 little dowels we need. Now the first set of holes I like to make for the dowels are for right here on the base of the main post. So we're going to be going just above the node. Now if you don't have one there, you can just feel free to do it wherever, just so long as you leave enough stuff right here that you can stick it in the ground and it won't move. So I'm going to start off by finding the very center of this, right above the node. Start by drilling a little bit of a pilot hole, and from there, just gonna spin my knife around. Once that's decently deep, I'm going to carve it out more accurately. After a little bit, I'm going to move to the other side, feel where that is and take a look, and just go on the other side right here. Make sure they're properly lined up. Seems about right. Yep. And I'm going to start drilling in from this side a little. And there we go, we've got our hole through. We're just going to enlarge that a little bit. And just keep going until our dowel is able to fit through it. So we're going to take this dowel, see if it fits yet. Doesn't quite yet. So we're going to keep going. There we go, and we're going to check again. That fits nicely. Okay, so since that fits, we're going to move on to the other side of it. Just going to line it up right here and put a pilot hole right in the same place. So then when we put these two together, they're going to line up. And this is just the same thing. See, now that fits through nicely. Now we can put these two together. Okay, so the next hole we're going to carve, I'm going to carve just around a hand length up from these ones. So that's going to be just right up here. Okay, so it's the same thing here. I'm just going to start on one piece and make sure it fits. Then I'm going to go into the other. Right, and for this one we're going to be fitting it to the one long piece. Yep, that fits nicely. Move on to the other side. There we go, and we want these two just to fit onto one side of the long piece. So that works out just perfectly. So now that we have these two pieces fit together, we can start deciding which of these pieces we want for what. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the longest one right here and using it for the hypotenuse. And we're going to take the shortest one right here and use it for the base. And so they're going to form a triangle just like that. And then we're going to be using this part as the guillotine. So we'll set this aside for now. And now with these two pieces, we need to start carving in the holes for which to fit them on. Okay, so I'm going to first start off with the hypotenuse part, the top of the triangle, and this is going to be fitting onto the outside of the dowel right here. So we're going to just do the same thing and carve in a hole that will fit right on that. And there we go, that fits nicely right there. Now we're going to do the bottom part. Now the bottom part right here is going to be fitting right in between the two halves, right through the dowel. So we're going to carve a hole that fits that dowel. There we go, now that fits in there very nice and tight. And now I'm just going to add on the second piece to figure out where to put the hole on the backs to connect the triangle. And it connects right there. And you can see from the side here, it doesn't make a perfect right triangle, but that's completely fine, because we can always just stick into the ground at a little bit different of an angle. So, I'm going to mark it right here, and right here, and begin carving in those holes. Now these two holes are going to be fitting the second small dowel, so we're going to constantly check for alignment with that. Not quite big enough yet, so we're going to make that hole bigger. There we go, the first piece fits through it. Now time to do the second piece. Now that these two pieces fit together, we can start working on our guillotine piece. Okay, so I realized I did a dumb thing and I cut my guillotine piece too short. Now your guillotine piece has to be just almost as long as your hypotenuse because it has to stick past the main post right here. But anyways, the first thing we have to cut here is another hole right here in the back. Now this is going to fit in between these two pieces on the dowel, but this one isn't going to be a tight fit like all the rest of them. This one's going to be more of a hinge, so we want it nice and loose so it can go up and down. There we go. You can see that fits on there nicely so it can hinge up and down. Next thing we need to carve in is a small hole on this side that the string's going to pass through. And we can carve this a little bit on the top side of it. It doesn't have to be centered for this one. And it doesn't have to be too big either. There we go, we've got that little hole carved through now. Now we've got one more thing to carve into here, and that is a notch that's going to fit it against the limb. Okay, so now to measure out where we want this notch to be cut, we're going to draw this up to around where our set trap's going to be. Now, the bomb position is obviously down here where it's already clamped down. At the top's around here where the hole's just poking out barely from the end of the post stick. So we're going to want our notch right around this area, close to the post stick, but not quite touching it. And then the limb's going to fit pretty much right there. I'll put a score right there so I know where I want it. And we can take it off. Okay, so we want this notch right here just to be the same size of the limb. So I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller than it to start off. Score it right there. And so then we can always make it a little bit bigger afterwards. And after this, we're also going to carve a notch into the bottom of the limb. So we're essentially making a small lap joint. Now, we don't want this notch to be too deep. We only want it to go maybe less than a quarter of a way across. So this is about the right size. And I'm just going to make it into about the shape of a square so then our limb can fit in there better. And there we go, the top's just about wide enough for the bow limb now. Now we can start carving the notch into the bottom of the bow limb. Now from here, to make sure that I don't split this, I'm just going to start carving in slowly a little V right here. And sort of going at this angle to make sure it doesn't run down the bamboo. And instead of starting to carve from the top right away, once I've got a little bit of a notch worked in there, I'm just going to flip it over and do the same thing. Okay, now once you've made the very end of this really nice and thin, and you can start working in on it a bit. Work really nice and slowly because the last thing you want to do here is split your bamboo. And there you go. Once you've got a little notch carved in there, you can see if it fits up with the other piece. It's not quite there yet, so I'm going to make that notch a little bit wider. Okay, that seems to fit in there pretty well. Alright, so now that we've got all the main parts of the body of the trap put together, there's two things we can do. We can either start working on our trigger now, or we can start tying up these joints with string and stuff just to reinforce them. I'm going to do that in just a sec, but then we'll get working on the trigger mechanism. Alright, so I've just reinforced the tip of the triangle here and the bottom joint right here. Now, when you're reinforcing with string, this is really just by your discretion, whichever of the joints are the weakest or the loosest. And in this case, mine was here and here. So let's get started on the trigger mechanism. Alright, so I've got another piece of bamboo right here. I'm going to cut three things out of it. I'm going to cut a trigger stick and two toggles. So for the trigger stick, we've already got like a little piece of bamboo sticking out right here, and we could just use that, really. I'm just going to cut that down a little further. Now for this, we don't want it to be too long. Just going to grab the trap right here. So with the guillotine arm just about up there, that would be sort of like the set position. We want this to reach from sort of like the back of the guillotine arm back here up to the post. So I'm going to cut it down to that. And there we go. You can see in its set position. This trigger we can just kind of slide behind the post and also behind the arm right here. And that's good. Next thing we want is our toggle. For our toggle we want sort of somewhat of a square piece. So I'm going to split off a section of bamboo here. Alright, now I've split that down to somewhat of a square shape. Now, for the length of this, we want it to come somewhere around 2/3 to 1/3 down the length of the arm here when it's set. So I'm going to say I want it just around right here, and I'll cut it right there. And there's toggle number 1. You can see it sort of reaches down to that third right there. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to cut a few grooves into it. So on one side I'm going to cut one groove, and on the other I'm going to cut another. This is just going to be just a little bit away from the tips. Just gonna go around, not gonna make it too deep because we don't want to split it too. And then move on to the other side. And there we go. Those are going to help our strings stay on. Okay, the last thing we need is another toggle, and this one's nice and small, so I'm just going to take the small piece of bamboo and just quickly split it. Now we can use this piece right here, but I'm going to cut it down just a little bit on both sides because this side's split. And that's all we need. Alright, so now we're done cutting everything. Now we just need some strings. So I've got a bit of ramie right here. And now this is a bit too thin, so what we're going to do is we're going to put a 2-ply into it. And we need 3 different strings. We need 2 short strings, and we need 1 long string for the spring limb. Now for the 2 short strings, I'm just going to use this one piece of string. This is long enough for both of them, so I can just cut it. So what I'm doing, just going to roll the string on my thigh. And you see when I do that, both sides are equally rolled. It comes up into this nice little twist. Okay, I've made it to the end, and now I'm just going to put a little knot in there to keep it from unraveling. And there's our first string. Now our second string, because it's the string for the spring limb, we're actually going to be doubling this up. But it doesn't have to be super long. Only about halfway up the spring limb or so. Maybe just a little bit more. So about that should be good. So it's just the same thing as before, just now we've got 2 strands on each side. Just going to roll that on our legs, and it'll just wind around itself. Alright, and then there's the string for our spring limb. Alright, so first I'm going to tie up the trigger system. So first of all, you take your first toggle, the longer one. Whichever side you put the notch a little bit closer to the end, you're going to use that side to tie to the other toggle. So what I like to do is just make a little clove hitch. There we go. I'm just going to flip it over and tie it up on the other side. And just a nice little overhand knot. Okay, and then from here, I'm just going to tie a little knot on the shorter standing end. That goes to the base of that overhand knot we just tied, so that it stops it from running. There we go. I'm going to cut off the excess. And we tie this longer end to our second toggle. Okay, and we don't want this to be too far away from it. I'd say no more than a finger's length, so that much should be plenty. Just going to clove hitch that on again. And this one, the orientation doesn't really matter too much. There we go. We're just going to tie it closer to the center, but just on the upper side. There we go. Now we've got our 2 toggles together. Now we can use the rest of the string to tie the first toggle to the guillotine arm. So to start off, we're going to do the same thing just on the other side and tie the string up onto the longer toggle. And we want to make sure when we tie this part up, it's on the same side of the bamboo as the other side. Alright, so you can see right here that both of these sides of string, they both come out of the part that was originally the outside of the bamboo. Alright, so now to tie this onto the guillotine arm, what we're going to do, take our loose string, we're going to pass it through the eye we made in the guillotine arm. There we go. And to measure how we want it, so if the guillotine arm's going to be set just around this height, this is how the trap would look like when it's set, we're going to want to tie it off right there. And there we go, it's tied on. So now when we bring this up, this is around the trap set height, the toggle will loop just around that dowel, and the guillotine's at pretty good height for trapping. Alright, now the very last thing we have to do is tie the spring limb string up. So, going to do the same thing as usual. First, make a clove hitch here. I'm going to first have the ends of the clove hitch tie off around the outside of it here. And I'm just going to have both of them loop back to the front where we want them. And just going to tie a knot right there to keep them in place. There we go. And I'm going to tie a little knot right here at the base of that overhand knot we just tied again, just to stop the string from running. There we go. Cut off the excess. And lastly, we need to tie the loop onto the end of the string. So we're going to put our spring limb just kind of on here and have it in the lowered position. And from here, we'll have to figure out how much string we need. So we want the top of our loop just to be just barely below our spring limb. So I'd say just right about there. And I'm going to even tie an adjustable loop just so I can adjust the tension if I want. And there we go, we've got our loop on it. And now we're ready to set our trap. Alright, so traditionally the trap would be set just like this, just sort of poked in the ground, and then from the indigenous people's wisdom, we know that the best place to put these traps is along the sides of fields and farms where they'd have these small barren paths where mice and rats would commonly run through while looking for food. Alright, now to set our trap, we're going to be sticking it in the ground first of all. There we go, nice and tight. And from here, we want to put our spring limb on. Now the part of the spring limb that's the outside of the bamboo is going to go facing towards the post. And that's because if it bends in this direction, it's likely to keep that bend. When the outside of the bamboo is the side that's bending, it usually doesn't stay that way. So then from here, we're going to take the string we just tied with the loop on top and loop that over there. Now it's a little bit loose, so since I tied an adjustable knot, I can move that down a little. There we go. And string that up on our bow limb, on our spring limb. Alright, to set the trap, what we're going to do, first things first, make sure you're holding up here so it doesn't come out of the ground while you're doing this. And you're going to take your long toggle and use that to bring up your guillotine arm. And then just loop your long toggle right around the top dowel. From here, you're going to take your short toggle and pass it behind your guillotine arm, sort of just at an angle like this. Make sure you're holding your short toggle down. You're going to take your trigger stick and pass it between your post sticks. And then on the other side, it's going to go behind the guillotine arm. And then the middle of it's going to go right in front of the, right in front of your toggle, your short toggle. And there we go, our trap is set. Alright, so say the stick is just sort of like a rat or mouse coming along looking for a meal. So they'd walk up right here to the trap when they're walking along one of those pathways. You see this right here, you have to weave through here, you touch the trigger, and they're caught. Alright, so from here you've caught that rat or mouse that's been eating all of your crops and stuff. And take it out, and looks like you got dinner. And that's all there is to it. Thank you for watching.